Alright guys, Kremp again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. New evidence emerging of Dashy's snaking drama that happened a few days ago against the Los Angeles Thieves. JP Krez has gone into the VOD's OpTic's coach and had a look for all the finer details and found Dashy's POV of this dramatic incident just the other day. From this perspective, it paints a rather different picture, although not all the pros seemingly agree. Parasite certainly gives his thoughts on that as well. Is he clean? Does he pass the check? Are they going to get the day of scrims back? That doesn't seem very possible. Very much interested your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today. I know that Scump was obviously reacting to Dashy giving him some gas for his search and destroy player for the last few days. Thought that was kind of nice to see, but we're just going to crack right on really because this was the VAR check that we saw the other day. This was the only POV we had. And as I said at the time, it would have been nice, and now it's nice, to see what Dashy's perspective on this looked like, because also Dashy wasn't, like, he was fighting the guy we're watching this from the POV perspective of, but what I do find interesting is that we did wonder, and it's been a general talking point, that you don't really see the snaking all the time. Sometimes it happens on the other side of the map, potentially, when we're not watching that player perspective on the cam, and sometimes the player's perspective we're watching makes it seem worse than it actually is. So, look, if you guys have been living under a rock over the last few days, and I know that people will say, I can't believe the community's still talking about it, because again, it was the big talking point of last night. I just think it is important to clarify this, because it's a grey area, it's for sure a grey area, but the pros need to decide what their opinion on this is and what they're going to do about it, because otherwise these issues are going to continue to occur. So it's definitely important that the pros try and resolve this issue and figure out what the conclusion is, because otherwise this type of stuff is going to happen again, and it probably will happen again. So anyway, this is just on, 0.25 times speed. Dashy, he hits the first pump, then the second pump he comes back up to crouching rather than fully standing up again. But I will say from Dashy's perspective, it doesn't look like this. And, well, cameras in the game can be somewhat broken. But it is interesting that the pros may have to recognize that one player's perspective of these incidents isn't necessarily enough to come to a proper conclusion. So we saw this yesterday. Shotzzy confirmed on stream that they'd been blacklisted for a day. Presumably yesterday was the day that they didn't practice, because they were scheduled to scrim. I think it was either Boston and Thieves or Ravenden Thieves, something like that anyway, yesterday. And I believe that, that was an extra day off for OpTic. Maybe they took a day off, or they watched some VOD, or they prepped, or whatever, because they got blacklisted from scrims. And Shotzzy says, look, the rules are the rules, can't complain. But of course, until that moment, all anyone had seen was the clip that we just saw. And from that POV, obviously we analysed it the other day. Is it 2 pumps? Is it 3 pumps? Is it 1 pump, a crouch, and then another pump? I mean, I don't know. There was some entertaining comments on yesterday's video over all this type of stuff. But Shotzzy and OpTic were like, okay, whatever. Like, Sib did it more egregiously than Dashy, nobody denies that, and only got a 1-day ban, but the feeling was, well, that was kind of first offense, we hadn't really decided what the rules were going to be, that was a 1-day. In future, if anyone does anything like Sib again, as we saw in the Hacienda, that will be a 3-day, a 1-week ban. That's pretty clear by the pros. But this one for Dashy, it was kind of marginal, they weren't really sure, but I was of the opinion, as you guys know yesterday, that based on the evidence they had, it seemed like they probably did the right thing, because my feeling was, if the pros are allowing Dashy to get away with this, it's a bit of a slippery slope to allow other pros to do something similar, and then they say, oh, well, I didn't mean to, or maybe they admit that they meant to, because Dashy obviously was talking about the importance of the intent and whether it matters and all this stuff, and Dashy was obviously trying to defend himself. I don't think he kind of admitted that, okay, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that, and maybe the rules on 1 pumping being the option might be the way to go from here. Difficult to say, but I feel like the pros taking a stand was probably the right thing to do, but now with new evidence has come to light, things look a little bit differently. So OpTic JP, he dives into this yesterday, and I'm not exactly sure how he got access to this and made this all work, because he says, I dug deep into the Observer VODs to find the never before seen branded BOV. Snake or no snake, you be the judge. So as I say, I'm not exactly sure, because the CDL aren't really going to care about this, but if JP, because the teams get access to the VODs after the series, and the observers, I think at some point anyway, have cameras on like all of the players to see their perspective. Now, and I'm guessing the teams can get access to this if they choose to ask for it and request it. Maybe not from the enemy team, but from their own team. That's probably a decent idea. So if you look at this perspective from Dashy, you might think, having watched this a couple of times, what are you talking about? Where's the snake, right? And, well, that is a very interesting way to have a look at it. So this is Dashy's perspective on the situation. Here's the guy up top. He hits the 1 pump, he hits the 2 pump, and then obviously there's the 3rd one, and we know that that was the gunfight that he got into. So, I mean, I guess we can slow this down in slow motion and have a look at it again, because this is what Dashy's POV looked like. And if we were watching his POV during this, you're probably watching thinking, "Car, maybe that was a little bit borderline," but it was not anything. So this first one, you can see how this is Parasite's perspective, because I think there are a few pros. The community is looking at this and saying, doesn't look like a snake. There are some pros looking at this, I'm sure, and saying, no, the punishment was fair. And Parasite's explanation why is, well, we'll get to it in a second. I think the point is that you can see here how Dashy goes prone for like 0.05 of a second. Like, this guy went prone, but you can see his hand come out, but then he's immediately standing up again. So that, on his screen, doesn't really look like he's snaked here, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't really look like anything at all. I mean, he barely goes down. That was literally it right there. But from the other guy's point of view, that looks like you've fully gone prone, and you can barely be seen, which I think is why some of the pros are still probably on board with their decision. So anyway, Dashy gets this kill. Then he goes prone again, and then kind of crouches, stands up, and then he crouches again, goes prone, stands up, and chows the guy. So I will say the cameras are kind of weird here, because these were the 3 pumps in question. The first pump is right about here, channeling the guy on the left-hand side. So this is, you know, pump number 1 in this scenario. This was then the second one, where it looked like he kind of just crouched on the other screen, but that's not really what it looked like from Dashy's perspective at all. And then there was the 3rd one there. So, look, snaking, fundamentally, and this is the thing that we haven't really talked about over the last few days, shouldn't really be in the game. Like, the developers, because it causes these problems with the cameras. From Dashy's POV here, it doesn't look how it looked from the other guy's perspective, which is a problem in the game, fundamentally. And ideally, in my opinion, they would do what they did back in Black Ops 3, where if you go prone, there's no getting out of it. You're putting your hand down, you're going prone, and then if you're standing up again, you're putting your hand out, you're standing up again. That would get rid of snaking. It was not an issue in BO3. I will say this snake is nowhere near as egregious as we have seen. Like, let's say a couple of years ago, Modern Warfare 2, when snaking was as rife as it's been in the CDL era, it was very much snake the heady, snake the heady, snake the heady, snake the heady to get info, and the other guy could do nothing about it. This is, you know, gunfight mechanics, right? Dashy's using the, you know, the pumps, as it were, to gain advantage in these fights. Maybe it's fair, maybe it's not fair, it's not as egregious as we have previously seen, but certainly from that angle, you might watch it and say, okay, maybe a little bit dirty, but, you know, on that POV alone, I don't think, you know, a lot of the fans would say that there's enough to say that that's a clear snake and it's got to be banned. So Zuma then says he's gone to VAR, he's had a look at it, he was correct, not a snake, the commissioner is never wrong, and people are saying, oh, he's cleared the VAR check, VAR, video assistant referee, if you guys aren't familiar with that terminology. But some of the pros, and we'll see Parasite's perspective, aren't so convinced really, just as I say because of the first one. As Illy says, that's clean, but very, very dirty, and even Dashy agrees. So I think this is, and Illy's back, by the way, to Illy COD. So Yoda King is officially dead and buried. But yes, so Illy's point of view is like, technically, by the rules on the 2 pumping and the fact that the second one wasn't quite the same, and the fact that he didn't quite go prone enough, but he kind of did a little bit, maybe it passes the test, but Illy's like, it's still, like, what he's done there from the other guy's perspective is definitely dirty. And Dashy seems to agree. Like, I don't think Dashy is super against the punishment that they've got, really. I think Dashy's kind of in agreement that, okay, yeah, maybe this was a little bit beyond the line, but technically, based on this perspective, you wouldn't maybe do anything about it. So I think the pros have to talk about this and figure out whether what Dashy's done here is allowed, because, as JP says, snake or no snake, you be the judge. It is, like, it is difficult to argue, and I don't know what the pros, I mean, I imagine they're talking in the GA chat about this still, you would think. Obviously, nice little rage bait here from Octane, but this was the tweet from Parasite which caused a bit of drama, because as he says, that's 3. Look at the animation from the first 2 pumps. Hand out to the left rises, as that's what I mentioned earlier. Only very, very briefly, but, you know, according to Parasite's perspective on it, that does count as a couple of pumps in there. Look at the crouch one, same animation, which only happens when you start to rise out of prone, he just cancelled it so fast that you can't tell in fast motion, which, to be fair, I think is probably a reasonable take. The second one, though, was still very much like grey area. I don't really know, and look, the pros might have their perspective on this. Obviously, Parasite was catching a load of flack for this tweet, and then, of course, he tweeted this out. And look, I think Parasite makes an interesting point in the tweet, but obviously, as he comes out with afterwards, he's just clouding all these guys, and it never really paints Parasite in a great light. But look, he did tweet this out. Here come the hard stuck golds and people that don't play at the game outside of zombies and pubs trying to tell me what snaking looks like. Dashy, best player of the game, but I'm not going to be biased. End of the day, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. Should be an A, but you know, whatever. But if asked, I would say it. And I think even Benjo was in the reply saying that there's probably a lot of pros that agree with Parasite's take on that, but they don't want to come out and say it on the timeline. And Parasite was also in agreement with this take, because I think this is the point really, that Dashy got a 1-day ban from scrims for OpTic Texas for something that was maybe 3 pumps, maybe it wasn't. It's pretty grey. I don't know if the pros will be able to look at that and say, well, what do we do? I think the conclusion for the pros is, next time this type of thing happens, let's get both POVs, right? Let's get the POV of the guy who did it, and let's get the POV of the guy that he was fighting, potentially, right? Because those POVs are available. You can go out there and get them. JP was able to get them within a couple of days of the match. So it's possible, if the pros want to do this, that they get their coach to say, hey, go to the CDL and say, look, we want to get the POV from this guy in this scrim or in this matchup. They'll do it, probably. And then, you know, the pros will be able to judge properly, because the idea of Dashy and OpTic getting blacklisted within 24 hours or so was, I guess, a quick decision, but maybe they'll look at the evidence in future and say, all right, we need to get both POVs before we make a judgment. It's always going to be grey area, this stuff. Like, it's never going to be clear cut whether something's a snake or not. It's always a little bit subjective, but I think maybe the pros need to get both perspectives in future before they make a decision. And also the level of the snake, because I think everyone is in agreement that the one that Sib did was far more egregious than what we saw from Dashy. But yet, Dashy and OpTic got the same punishment. And Parasite's like, yeah, obviously it's a difficult one, but not every snake should be the same penalty, necessarily. That might be the argument there. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Obviously, you know, Dashy was looking at the results of this and saying, maybe I'm actually clear after all. But I thought this was pretty funny. Dashy reading the GA chat knowing that he didn't snake, but wanted an extra day off. And Dashy thought that one was pretty funny as well. So, yeah, they managed to get their extra day off, OpTic Texas. There was also this reply as well, just another one really here from TJ. Again, from some of the comments we saw earlier, obviously Parasite gives his thoughts. TJ, maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek really, but to be fair, both TJ and aBeZy making the implication that, yeah, this is pretty dirty, it's certainly close enough. Look, I don't think TJ's calling out Bruce exactly, you know, dirty player, terrible player and all this stuff, but this was a pretty funny interaction here, because TJ comes out and says, clearly a dirty player, this Dashy guy, and then Punjabi here. This is just one of those accounts that you see on Twitter and you're like, you know, how is this esport even real? This guy Punjabi comes on and says, you're, which is spelled wrong again, a fat player. And here he is with his, like, you know, 20 followers or whatever, 60 following, joined a couple of years ago. Dashy thought that was pretty funny. And then TJ says, you couldn't tweet that out on main, had to use the burner, right? So obviously joking that this is Dashy's burner account that he's been using to call out TJ when necessary. So thought that was pretty funny, but very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below, because this is not an easy one to come to a conclusion on, really. And also, if it's true that the pros look at this new evidence and say, well, maybe Dashy didn't snake after all, you know, what do you do about it? Because they've already lost the day of scrims. So next time he does it, do they say, well, you know, this time you get away with it because last time you didn't get away with it? I don't know what the answer is there anyway. Probably nothing really happens. OpTic take the day off. The pros learn a thing or two about how better to handle, on paper anyway, these GA situations. But whether the pros will actually learn anything, I'm never so convinced. So intrigued to your thoughts and comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.